Hey friends, and welcome to Quest Givers. DM Scotty here and DM Gareth. We're going to talk about mechanics from other games that you can kind of steal and use in your own game, right? So pretty cool subject, I think.
Absolutely. Let's get on with the video.
All right.
If you're looking for adventure, grab the modules each month to support the channel and play the campaign with your gaming group. You're sure to get hooked on adventure.
If you'd like to help support the making of these videos, which is free on YouTube, you can purchase our modules on questgivers.com, and we've got other things you can purchase there, as well as our Kickstarter on September 1st. Scotty, borrowing mechanics from other games. This is like where you, as a GM or whatever, you're playing one game, you kind of expand your knowledge of role-playing as a hobby. And you'll begin to learn that sort of some other games you might not like and other games you may like more, but you may find that there's mechanics in certain things that you want to kind of bring into the main game that you're playing. So, like, why would you do this?
That's a great point. Why not just take the book, play every game as written in the book, and don't deviate from that? You can do that. I mean, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But as Gareth says, as you kind of become more of a connoisseur of games, and you're putting all these games in your head, and you're seeing the different ways to resolve, because basically the games are resolving things that happen in the world, right? Between you and the characters and the NPCs and all that. So why not go to this table of all these other games and then pick and choose what you want to add to the way you want to run your game, right? So I think that's a great way to look at it. Like, if you like this mechanic from another game and it doesn't break your game, steal it, put it in the game. Maybe one game wants you to roll, when you do a cross-country trek, they want you to roll for every 20 miles or something for an encounter, and you don't want to do that. Just hand wave that. Don't do that. Just say, okay, you arrive there, or if you want to have an encounter without rolling, just have the encounter. If that makes the story more interesting, do that. So yes, liberally steal from other games. Don't be shy about doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's also the thing is, the reason why you do it is because some mechanics actually work better from other games. They may handle, as you say, travel better, or handle economics better, or there's so much stuff that could be handled better than the game you're playing now, that you can incorporate those into your game. And one of the key things I feel is play styles. There are various different play styles of games, and that's one of the things, is you find a play style for your group. So not for you as the GM, but for your group, the players like playing this way from another game. Incorporate that in, because anything that improves the game for your group is good. So improvement in terms of fun, in terms of how much gameplay you can get into a session. So if you find some way of handling combat faster, so that you can do 10 combats in a session rather than 2, that's a good thing.
I agree, and if you steal things from other games, and it doesn't have to be for every session, right? So say you're playing a game and the tower is collapsing or whatever, something like that, right? You could use a Jenga tower like they use in Dread, and say the tower's collapsing, right? You could have the players pull Jenga blocks out, and if they collapse the tower, it collapses on them. That's really pretty cool mechanic, right? Or say you're doing a chase, and it can be, in some games it can be difficult to do a chase, especially maybe in D&D, right? So maybe you use cards to do a chase, like, if you play a certain card, it trips you up or trips the other person up, or that kind of thing. So don't be afraid to bring those other mechanics into the game, even just for like one-off sessions, to just spice it up a little bit and add some variety to your game.
What specific 2 or 3 rules from various games, do you guys like to, or have had a lot of fun incorporating into your fantasy role-playing game?
I incorporated, from about 12 different games. I built 70 systems, so I built an entire game out of borrowed rules. So it's difficult to pick one But in 7D system, I have story value, which a lot of people would call luck points or inspiration, which is like a roll again mechanic. But I took it further where a person can actually add things to their characters or add things to the environment using these points as well. So you're in a corridor and you're getting into a battle and you don't have a weapon. So you look around and the guy will say, I find an iron pole, and he uses a point to like generate an item in the corridor. Or I find a rusty old sword, something that may be found in that, that is plausible that it would be there. And they can use that to then, aha, I actually have a weapon. So that's one thing that I've used. But as I say, the whole game is built around borrowed mechanics.
Yeah.
Scotty?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, Gareth was right. He's built his entire game about those kind of mechanics that he likes. I'll tell you what really inspired me was Dungeon World. The way that the Dungeon Master didn't roll, the way that the dice worked, where there were middle results, which is really an interesting idea, where you get something and I get something. And I like to port that into my D&D descriptions. What I'm saying? Like if someone fails, just slightly, I might have more of a middle ground failure, as opposed to, just a total catastrophe, like an on and off type thing. Like you either fall off the cliff or you don't. It's like there might be a middle ground where they slip and they alert the enemy. But they don't, maybe they're still hidden, right? Maybe they're sneaking around, they're still hidden, they just barely miss their roll, or just by a little bit. And it doesn't mean that they fall out from cover and then the guys see them, right? If they rolled a 1, that might happen. But, you could say that they step on something, make a noise, or something falls or whatever, and the enemy turns and they see there's I heard something, but they don't quite know what it is. They don't know that there's someone sneaking over there. They just know they heard something. So, it doesn't have to be a total on and off. And I think that's what I've really ported into my D&D games, is that kind of more of a little middle ground of stuff that happens.
Even things like, people like to go to town and go to gambling, that's our guys all used to love to try and double their gold by going to town and gambling. You can bring in card mechanics. So you can then use like this certain Western games that use playing cards as the actual resolution mechanics. So when you're in the tavern, maybe you want to then play poker hands, especially when you're doing social circumstances where you give yourself a certain poker hand and then you deal out cards, and the players then, through bluffing and so on and so forth, you then are able to break down the character to reveal information using poker. So there's a lot of like weird and wonderful resolution mechanics that can then make the game more interesting and fun. But again, it's not like you're basically playing the whole game. You're just using one part of it that makes your game feel better or more interesting or fun. So one of the things we've always talked about on this channel is strict turn order. And this is like, when you're playing something like D&D, D&D does not have strict turn order, but the game we feel works better with strict turn order for all the reasons we've said in other videos. So that's one way that we've done it on this channel in terms of what we're saying. And of course, because we're not specific to D&D and we talk about ICRPG and Dread and all these other games, we're talking about role-playing games in general. So again, when we're talking about the certain things on how to run the game, we're talking about meta information that stands outside of all the games. And then we're basically then advocating, pick what works best for you. So you don't have to play a certain way. That's not what we're saying. You just explore the hobby as a whole, find these other little games, and find out what makes them good in certain parts, or good as a whole. It may be your main game, and then just adding little bits and pieces as you go along. What about monsters?
Oh yes, monsters. Yeah, steal, liberally steal monsters from other games, because you can get some great ideas, and once you get experience with a game, it's really easy to like just make up monster stats on the fly, right? Gareth and I have talked about this. Once you get a little bit of experience, you can start making up monster stats on the fly, and the monster, you can have the monster be more about like the theme of the monster more than the stats of the monster, which I like. That's why I like to use unique monsters, and in Quest Givers we do too. We like to use monsters that aren't the standard orc and that kind of thing, so that players don't know these monsters and they can have a unique thematic experience with the monster. So yeah, steal all kinds of monsters from, because there's more than just the game, D&D. There's way more than D&D, and there's all kinds of other monsters that you can bring in, and yeah, steal that stuff. And like I say, it's really easy to just change the stats to fit the game you're playing. You don't really have to have those stats in front of you if you just have a little bit of experience playing the game, I think.
That I've grabbed that I use is the exploding dice from Savage Worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes, even though it's not a critical hit, it may be a really good hit, depending on the damage rolls. And that's one thing I've always liked, is like, okay, if you're hitting somebody with a sword, yeah, if you hit, you're going to hurt them. It's just a matter of how, degrees of how much. But one thing I've also done that I wanted to see if you guys do is borrowing not just from other game mechanics, but other genres entirely. Because I've brought in sci-fi, I've brought in stuff like Star Wars into a D&D game before. I had them find a crashed ship once that had a predator on it. They didn't know it was a ship, they didn't know what it was, but it was a cool one shot that I ran. Have you guys ever pulled, like I said, from other genres, not just mechanics?
Absolutely. I did one where I was heavy into 40k at the time, and there was this huge explosion on a mountain, and the players had to investigate, and they went up there, and it was a crashed like hive from Space Hulk, and there were Tyranids come flooding out of it with Terminators fucking trying to wipe out the Tyranids, and the party doesn't know what the hell's going on. They're trying to use like spells and their primitive weapons to try to defeat Terminators and Tyranids. So that made it very, very interesting. But it was a one session thing. I don't think I would have been able to do that as the Terminators keep popping up or whatever. Yeah, that because obviously they've got futuristic weapons that can do a hell of a lot more damage. But you can absolutely. I could have continued that. Like the Terminators have to try and find a way back, so they're roaming the countryside, trying to find a time stone or a whatever, from a Star Trek. They're trying to find something that can then get them back to their own dimension or whatever. So yeah, I have done that. That can be very cool. A lot of the times it's things like I'll steal from Sherlock Holmes. So you can, all the old Sherlock Holmes stories, take that, and that's a mystery in the game. So the players play Sherlock Holmes, and then you have an NPC that's kind of like Watson that asks questions, and you just do the same story. I've done that before, and that works very, very well. And as a GM, you should be fast and loose with the rules anyway. Don't live and die by the rules, because that's when the rules lawyers come out, and then everything gets bogged down in a discussion about the rules, and you're not playing the game. So as a new GM, if you're just starting out, remember that you're in charge. So you make decisions. If someone wants to bring up a rules question or whatever, you say in the break or at the end of the game. Then we'll discuss the rules. And then you can say, well, I'm actually using the rules from another game. That's why I've done it this way. And that's why it doesn't appear in the book. So it's a great excuse to do whatever the hell you like. But, one of the other things is storytelling mechanics, because a lot of games don't actually tell you how to tell a story. There's guides for the dungeon master and guides for the flame tenderer and all these kinds of different terms. But there's very few that actually say, this is how you structure a story, this is what you got to do. So those mechanics you've got to bring from other things that are not necessarily role-playing games. It could be movies, it could be books, it could be theater, any kind of storytelling device you can bring into the game and utilize in the game that you're playing.
And like adding to that, there are lots of games that are really more storyteller driven and less mechanic, dice driven or other mechanics. And you can bring those into your dice mechanics games. Get more creative with your descriptions. Don't just make it on and off. Don't just make it you miss or you hit. Get more descriptive with it. Have consequences to actions and that kind of thing that aren't dice driven, that are character driven. That's what I like to do. If a character decides something, there's probably going to be a consequence. And, it's not necessarily a combat consequence. It could be some other thing. Or, it could be good or bad, depending on what the character decides. So don't get locked into that mechanic-driven, thing that you have to have. Every single resolution has to have a die roll or a game mechanic roll. You don't need that. If a character, I call it due diligence in my games. If a character does due diligence, then I give them information. I tell them something cool. I let them do something cool. That kind of thing. Don't make it dependent on dice. Make it dependent on the player's interaction with the game itself. And I think that's something you can really take from the story-driven games.
A dude named Diligence.
My son's been using Blades in the Dark's experience rules on the little sub-game of experience of leveling up. In Blades in the Dark, you have to engage in all your vices, which has created he's told me there's been some awesome role-playing that's come out of that. And I was thinking, boy, if you could use like each deadly sin, if every character had a deadly sin, and in order to gain this level, they would have to engage in the sin for whatever it was. So, it could be a week of just going out and feasting or drinking, or, you could be very proud and have to spend all your time away from the world in your own little world meditating or something. And he said it was actually working pretty well for creating a lot of story ideas.
Yeah, that's a good point for rules that help enhance, the role-playing of the game.
And yeah, that's the kind of thing you'll get from like Fate and what's the one with the red cover with the stick figure dude? Is that Fate? No, that's Fiasco. So that has a lot of that kind of sort of almost LARP type elements in it that can help with bringing out the characterizations from your players. Bring out your dead. I mean, when you started your channel, The DM's Craft, and you started showing terrain without grids on it, you got a lot of flack. How dare you use like DM dungeon tiles without 1-inch grids on them? And then Wylock took it further and did 1 1/4-inch grids. I mean, heresy. Absolute heresy. This is, come on, honestly, this is a very good example of how you can take something that's not in the rule book and make the game better. In my opinion, measuramentless or gridless systems actually make the game better because it's faster. You're not taking time counting 1, 2, 3. You're not playing Monopoly. You're not playing chess. You're playing RPGs. Get with the program.
And it was funny because, when I started doing my videos, 4E was the big thing, right? And that was very measurement driven, right? There were squares, which a square was 1 inch, but there were squares. And if you didn't, it was really hard for people, I think, to wrap their heads around, how can you play D&D without squares or, grid? And it's funny because nowadays with 5E, where it's embraced the theater of the mind thing a lot more than 4E did, I don't get those complaints anymore. It's rare that I ever get those complaints, like people like, how could you ever, not have a grid on your terrain and this kind of thing. Sacrilege. But it's just funny how, because the game has evolved in a certain way, the complaints and the criticisms of what I was doing have evolved in a certain way too. So, and you know, I don't like to use grids because I like to keep it fluid. You know, I like to keep the game fluid. And like Gareth said, I don't want it to feel like a board game. I don't want to feel like you're counting spaces. I have tons of vids on, you know, not using grids and that kind of thing, but with my terrain and all that. But anyways, you know, I think that's a great thing to think about too. Are you one of those kind of people that wants to be that precise with your game? Or are you like a person like maybe like Fate where they have zones? You know, there's, oh, this is zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. It's kind of a much more abstract idea, you know, or there's like terrain that is equal to, you know, bonuses or minuses for the character. If that's where you want, you know, if that's where you want to go, you know, bring that into your game. Don't be shy about it, and you know, if it works for your game, use it.
All the theater of the mind people are now like, how dare you use terrain? And on that note, we will now end this video. Use terrain. We'll see you on Friday.
See you next time, friends.